On the far edge of Hollow Creek, past the silent woods and cracked asphalt road, it stood a building that no one in town wanted to remember. The old doll factory. Its walls were stained green with moss. The roof sagged in places, rust bleeding through the metal sheets. Every window was broken. Jagged glass teeth left a grin at the sky. For decades it had sat untouched, a carcass of industry long since forgotten. But people didn't stay away because it was old. They stayed away because of the stories. Every town has one, the place parents warn their children about. In Hollow Creek, that place was the doll factory. Some said they'd seen lights flicker inside long after midnight. Others swore they'd heard laughter, tiny voices in the empty halls. And over the years, people had gone missing. Teenagers on dares, a drifter or two, a woman who cut through the grounds on her walk home. None of them came back. The stories bled together into one whispered truth. The factory was cursed, or worse, haunted. And then, one night, a delivery driver found himself parked just a stone's throw from its gates. He hadn't planned it. His route had run long. His eyes were heavy, and the next gas station was too far. He figured he'd pull over for a few minutes, just to stretch his legs. The headlights of his truck cut weakly across the weeds in the cracked fence. The man stepped out, rolling his shoulders. Pulling in a lungful of the cool night air, he struck a match, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the side of the cab. Silence pressed down around him, the kind of silence you only get far from town. No cars, no people, just the faint rustle of trees and the creak of the old fence swaying in the wind. He exhaled a long stream of smoke. His eyes drifted to the hulking shadow of the factory. Even from here, he could see the yawning black windows, like hollow eye sockets. He muttered to himself, "Creepy damn place." And then he heard it, a sound that cut through the quiet like a blade. A child crying. At first he thought he'd imagined it. Maybe the wind had caught the sound of an animal. He froze, listening hard. There it was again. Thin, high-pitched, the unmistakable sobs of a young child. The cigarette trembled between his fingers. The crying was coming from the factory. His chest tightened, heartbeat thudding in his ears. What child could possibly be in there? The building had been locked and boarded for years. Every sane person in Hollow Creek avoided it. The sound rose, bouncing off the broken walls. A sob, then a hiccup, then another wail. The man dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his heel. His instincts screamed at him to run back to the truck, to drive away and forget what he'd heard. But another part of him, deeper human, knew he couldn't just leave. What if a kid really was trapped inside? His hand shook as he pulled out his phone. The numbers blurred for a second before he forced himself to focus. He dialed 911. The operator's voice came through, calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? The driver swallowed hard. His voice came out hoarse. I don't know how to explain this. I'm parked near the Hollow Creek doll factory. I swear to God, there's a kid crying inside. There was a pause on the line. Then, sir, are you saying you hear a child inside the abandoned factory? Yes, the driver hissed, eyes fixed on the dark building. I can hear them. They sound. He broke off, because the crying had grown louder, more desperate. As if the child knew he was listening, his stomach nodded. They sound like they're in trouble. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Stay where you are, sir. Officers will be dispatched to your location. Do not attempt to enter the building yourself. I won't, he lied automatically. He shoved the phone back in his pocket. Hands trembling, he climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and stared out at the factory as if the shadows might move at any second. Minutes crawled by like hours. The crying faded, then rose again, echoing across the night. Sometimes it sounded closer, sometimes farther. The driver gripped the steering wheel, whispering to himself, "Just a few more minutes. Help's coming. Just hang on, kid." He didn't know who he was talking to, the child or himself. Then, at last, red and blue lights flickered against the trees. A patrol car slowed to a stop beside his truck. Relief surged through his chest. Two figures emerged. Detective Daniel Hayes, tall, broad, his badge glinting under the headlights, and beside him the lean, muscular frame of his canine partner, Shadow. The driver rolled down his window fast, pointing a shaky hand at the factory. "It's in there," he stammered. "I swear to you, the kid, crying. You hear it too, right?" Daniel's eyes narrowed as he studied the dark building. The night pressed heavy, silent now, as though the crying had never happened. But Shadow's ears pricked, his body stiffened, nose pulling toward the gates. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Daniel clipped the leash to his vest. His voice was calm, steady, but with an edge of steel. "All right, we'll check it out." The driver shook his head violently. "Don't go in there. I'm telling you, there's something wrong with that place. Daniel didn't answer. His hand rested on the flashlight at his belt, the other on the holster at his side. He looked at Shadow, then at the black mouth of the factory's doorway. Let's see what's waiting for us together. Man and dog crossed the broken lot, their shadows stretching long under the patrol car's lights. The driver watched them go, heart pounding. Cigarette forgotten at his feet. He didn't know it then, but that call to 911 had just opened the door to something far worse than a child in danger, something Hollow Creek had buried for decades. And as Daniel Hayes and Shadow stepped inside the abandoned factory, the darkness seemed to lean forward, welcoming them. The first thing Daniel noticed as he pushed open the rusted metal door was the smell. Thick, stale, like dust mixed with old fabric and something sour that had been rotting for years. It hit his nose the way an empty grave might. The hinges screamed as the door gave way. Shadow pressed forward immediately, nose low, muscles tight under his black coat. His growl was low but steady, a warning that Daniel had learned never to ignore. The beam of Daniel's flashlight sliced through the dark, and what it revealed froze him where he stood. The floor was carpeted with fragments of dolls, heads cracked open, glassy eyes staring up from the dust, limbs torn off, torsos hollowed, porcelain faces shattered into 1,000 pieces. The ground crunched beneath his boots as though he was walking on bones. Everywhere he looked, there were more piles of plastic arms, wigs of synthetic hair matted with grime, broken music boxes whose gears still twitched faintly in the silence. It wasn't just debris, it was a graveyard. Daniel muttered under his breath. Jesus. Shadow's ears flicked back. His tail was rigid, his body trembling with restrained energy. He wasn't afraid, Shadow never was, but he was on edge, alert. The deeper they moved, the heavier the air seemed to become. Dust swirled in the beam of light like ghosts rising to meet them. And then it came, a sound, not crying this time, something worse. A laugh, high, thin, drawn out, like a child trying to stifle giggles under a blanket. Daniel swung the flashlight toward the sound. Nothing, just row after row of abandoned shelves. They were splintered and sagging, lined with the remains of half-made dolls that looked more like corpses than toys. The laugh came again, but from a different direction behind him. He spun. The beam caught a porcelain face, cracked down the middle, for a heartbeat. He swore the doll's lips twitched. No, he muttered, tightening his grip on the flashlight. It's just shadows, just the wind. But he didn't believe his own words. The laugh faded into whispers. Dozens of them, faint, indistinct, like children trading secrets at the back of a classroom. Shadow snarled, teeth flashing. His paws scraped against the floor as he pulled on the leash, wanting to surge forward. Easy, boy, Daniel whispered. Not yet. They pressed deeper. The flashlight's circle jumped across the walls. Where murals of painted dolls had once smiled brightly, now the paint had cracked and peeled, leaving twisted faces that seemed to leer at them from the gloom. Daniel's heart pounded harder with every step. He told himself it was just the stories, just the driver's panic bleeding into his own mind. He'd been in worse places before. He'd seen worse things. But then his light caught something that made his stomach turn cold. Dozens of mannequins stood in the far corner. Not dolls. Mannequins full-sized, human-shaped, made of plaster and wood. Their glass eyes reflected the flashlight in tiny pinpoints of light. Some had wigs, others wore tattered dresses, and a few had no faces at all. And all of them were facing the same direction, toward the door, as though they'd been waiting for him. Daniel's throat went dry. He shifted the flashlight, telling himself it was nothing, that someone had just dumped them there decades ago. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw one blink, just once. So fast he couldn't be sure. The beam of light jerked back, locking on the mannequin. It stood still, frozen in place, eyes wide and glassy. Daniel exhaled slowly. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe exhaustion was messing with his mind. But then the whispering returned, louder this time. Words he couldn't quite understand, rushing around the room like a current. Shadow barked sharply, the sound exploding in the silence. The echoes bounced off the walls like gunfire. Daniel raised his voice, firm and commanding, trying to ground himself. This is Special Agent Hayes with K9 Unit. If anyone's in here, show yourself now. The words rang out, swallowed by the emptiness. No reply, only silence, and then the faint sound of something rolling. Daniel turned the light just in time to see a doll's head tumble across the floor, spinning in a slow circle before coming to a stop at his boots. Its painted smile was cracked down the middle. For the first time that night, Daniel felt his hand twitch toward his weapon. Not because of what he saw, but because of what he felt. The factory wasn't abandoned. Something was here with him, watching, Testing him, Shadow growled again, pulling toward the far wall, his nose pressed against the bricks, snuffling hard, tail lashing. Daniel followed his lead, crouching to run a hand across the surface. The wall looked newer than the rest. The mortar between the bricks was still faintly damp. Someone had sealed it recently. He pressed his palm against the cold stone. For a moment, all was quiet, and then he heard it, a faint sound, a knock. From the other side, Daniel froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the wall. Again, the sound came, a slow, deliberate knock, and then another, like someone trapped, begging to be heard. "God," he whispered. Shadow barked wildly, claws scraping the ground, his body desperate to dig through. Daniel staggered back, pulse racing. His mind screamed that he had to call it in. Whatever was behind that wall, it wasn't supposed to be there. He pulled the radio from his vest, voice tight, as he reported in within minutes. The rest of the investigative team arrived, their flashlights cutting through the dark. The wall was examined, knocks were confirmed. There was something behind it, a tunnel, a chamber. But after a brief, hushed discussion, the team leader gave the order Daniel dreaded: too unstable. If we breach it, the whole structure could collapse. Seal it off. We'll mark the location and come back later. Daniel's fists clenched. We can't just leave it. There's someone in there. The leader shook his head firmly. Not tonight. We'll get a specialist crew. For now, we seal it. And just like that, the decision was made. The wall freshly built, hiding God knew what was left untouched. As the team packed up their gear and headed back into the night, Daniel glanced once more at the bricks. The knocks had stopped, but his gut twisted. Whatever was on the other side, it had heard him, and it wasn't finished. The Hollow Creek doll factory was dead silent, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the kind that presses down on you, thick and suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel swept his flashlight across the floor. Shards of broken porcelain crunched under his boots, each step snapping like bones in the dark. Doll heads lay scattered, eyes cracked, mouths frozen open in eternal screams. Shadow moved a few paces ahead, muscles tense, his nose twitching. The dog's low growl rumbled, vibrating in the empty air. He wasn't just alert, he was unsettled. Then Shadow froze, every muscle locked, his ears pinned back, tail stiff, a growl deepening into something raw and primal. His focus was fixed on a far wall, one that looked at first glance no different from the rest. Daniel followed the dog's stare. Old brick, dust, water stains trailing downward like dried tears. But as he stepped closer, he noticed the difference. These bricks weren't the same as the rest. They were brighter, cleaner, and the mortar Daniel's beam caught it glistening faintly, wet in spots. Recently built. His stomach tightened. Someone had bricked this section up not years ago, but days, maybe even hours. He pressed his gloved hand against the surface. It was cool, damp, the mortar smudging faintly under his touch. Whoever sealed this wall hadn't wanted it to be permanent. They wanted it fast, temporary. Shadow wind, pouring at the base, nails scratching against the stone. That's when Daniel heard it. Knock, faint, muffled, almost lost beneath the weight of the building's silence. He leaned in, pressing his ear against the brick. Knock, knock, knock. 3 strikes, evenly spaced, measured, not random, not a trick of the pipes. Someone was knocking back. Daniel's pulse jumped. He staggered back a step, his breath fogging in the cold air. Shadow barked sharply, hackles raised, his whole body trembling not from fear, but from urgency. Daniel grabbed his radio. "Control, this is Agent Hale, possible occupant inside. I need a secondary team with structural support." The reply crackled, confirming backup. Minutes later, the sound of boots echoed through the factory. 2 investigators arrived with scanning equipment, their voices too loud for a place that demanded whispers. They followed Daniel to the wall, muttering as they scanned. "This section isn't original," one said. "Blueprints don't show it. Hollow cavity behind here." The scanner beeped, stronger, louder, definitely a void. Daniel's jaw tightened. "There's someone back there. I heard knocking." The 2 exchanged skeptical glances. One crouched to examine the mortar lines, frowning. "Foundation's unstable. If we break this wall wrong, we could bring the whole thing down. If someone is back there, they'll be crushed before we reach them." "So what? We just leave it?" Daniel snapped. His voice echoed off the broken rafters, harsher than he intended. "We report it, secure it, wait for authorization," the team leader replied firmly. His tone wasn't cruel, it was procedural. "We don't open it tonight." Daniel wanted to argue, to tear the bricks down himself with his bare hands, but protocol weighed heavy. He'd been through this before. You break protocol, You risk lives including your own. So he stood there, silent. As they marked the wall with bright tape, photographed it, and logged the anomaly, one of them muttered under his breath, "Probably rats. Echoes in a place like this will mess with you." Daniel didn't respond. He knew what he'd heard. That rhythm hadn't been random, it had been deliberate. Shadow barked again, sharp and furious, straining against his leash toward the bricks. The investigators ignored him, already packing up. To them, it was just another wall in another dead building. But not to Daniel, not to Shadow. As the backup team left, the factory swallowed itself in silence once again. The kind of silence that wasn't empty but listening. Daniel stood rooted in place, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. His beam caught something else this time. The thin trail of moisture sliding down the mortar, glimmering like sweat on skin. The wall was alive at least. It felt that way. He forced himself to back away. Shadow stayed behind, teeth bared, growling until Daniel tugged him firmly. The dog resisted, then finally obeyed, but his eyes never left the bricks. The heavy doors of the factory closed with a metallic slam behind them. But it didn't feel like safety. It sounded like a warning. Outside the night was still, the cold biting at Daniel's face. The investigators drove off, their taillights swallowed by the dark. Now it was just Daniel and Shadow, standing alone under the Hollow Creek sky. Daniel stared back at the factory. His chest felt heavy, like a weight had been dropped there. The others had made their call, but deep down, he knew they were wrong. He had heard the knocking. Shadow had felt it. Someone was inside. The dog wind, tugging toward the building again. Almost desperate, Daniel exhaled, whispering, "We'll come back." The words tasted like a promise. As he turned to leave, a flicker of light pulsed faintly behind one of the boarded windows. Daniel froze, his breath caught in his throat, and then, carried on the night air, came the sound. Knock. Soft, patient, certain. Daniel's skin crawled. Shadow barked furiously into the dark, his echo bouncing across the empty lot. There was no doubt anymore. Something was alive behind that wall. Something that did not want to stay hidden. And for Daniel, this was only the beginning. Daniel didn't sleep after the wall. He tried lying flat on the narrow bunk. Lights off. Shadow curled at his feet. But silence was no longer silence. It was punctuated by echoes. Patient and steady. Knock, knock, knock. Every time his eyes closed, he heard them again. When sleep finally came, it was poisoned dreams of walls pressing inward, of small hands reaching through cracks, of voices whispering just beyond his grasp. By morning, his body felt like lead, his eyes raw from fatigue. Still, he forced himself to review the body cam footage, frame by frame. The factory unfolded in harsh light, broken dolls, piles of rubble. At first, nothing. Then his stomach lurched, a mannequin in the corner. Its eyes, they moved, not dust, not a glitch. One frame, eyes left, next eyes right. Then the lids closed and opened. Daniel's breath caught. He replayed the clip again and again, his pulse quickening. Plastic doesn't blink. Worse, the mouth twitched, like it wanted to form words. He slammed the laptop shut. Shadow lifted his head immediately, ears erect, gaze pinned on the door. The room was quiet. Yet Daniel swore he heard something else, faint children's voices, laughter mixed with weeping. Not outside, not from the laptop, from somewhere closer. He pressed his palms to his temples. But the whispers didn't fade. By afternoon, he couldn't stay in the station. He drove, Shadow tense beside him. The moment Hollow Creek's factory came into view, the air shifted. The building loomed in the distance, windows black like watching eyes. Shadow growled low, fur bristling, body straining against the harness. Then he barked sharp, furious. A warning Daniel had learned to trust. Daniel kept driving, but his chest was tight. The dog wasn't wrong. Something in that place wanted out. Back at the station, life moved normally around him, phones ringing, agents laughing, coffee machines hissing. But to Daniel, every sound carried an undertone. Children crying, dolls breathing, bricks shifting. That night, exhaustion drove him back to the footage. One last time, he told himself. Proof or paranoia. He froze. Behind the blinking mannequin, in the far corner, something darker than Shadow itself. A tall, thin outline, still. Watching. Then, as the beam swept past, it leaned forward. Daniel slammed the laptop closed, heart racing. Shadow growled in the corner, lips curled. The dog had seen or sensed it too. Protocol was meaningless now. Reports and waiting wouldn't stop the whispers. His superiors could call him reckless, unstable. It didn't matter. He needed answers. He grabbed his gear, clipped Shadow's harness. But when they reached the door, Shadow dug in, claws scraping against the floor. Refusing, Daniel knelt, hand trembling on the collar. "Stay," he whispered, his voice cracked. "I'll do this." For the first time in years, he left his partner behind. The drive to Hollow Creek was soundless. No radio, just the low hum of the engine and the pounding in his chest. The factory rose like a corpse in moonlight, jagged windows gleaming faintly. Daniel parked, stepped into the cold, and approached the gates. This time, the whispers weren't in his head. They came from all directions, echoing, alive, children crying, laughing, begging. The wall wasn't the only thing hiding secrets, and Daniel was about to break every rule to uncover them. The factory was darker than before. Daniel stepped through the doorway with Shadow at his side, the beam of his flashlight slicing across dust-choked air. The silence pressed down like a weight, thicker than the night outside. Broken dolls littered the floor, their glass eyes catching the light in jagged flashes. Shadow padded ahead, nose twitching, his body taut with unease. Daniel's boots crunched on porcelain fragments, each step echoing too loud in the emptiness. Then Shadow stopped. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. His head tilted toward a slab of concrete near the wall. Daniel followed his gaze. Among the cracked, dirt-caked dolls scattered everywhere, one figure stood out. Perfect, untouched, it lay upright, as though deliberately placed. Its porcelain face gleamed pale beneath the light, hair neatly brushed, dress unsoiled and new. Daniel's breath caught. That doll hadn't been here before. He crouched. The eyelids were painted shut, lashes delicate, hands folded against its chest. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent, startling the silence. Daniel steadied his hand and touched the figure. Not porcelain, not cold, soft, warm. He froze, then pressed, gently. A faint pulse throbbed beneath his glove. Rhythmic, human. Daniel jerked back, heart pounding. He leaned closer again, breath fogging in the air. The doll's chest rose faintly, struggling for breath. "Jesus," he whispered. Shadow wind, circling, pawing at the concrete slab. His claws scraped the edge until dust trickled down the wall behind it. Daniel swept his flashlight over the bricks. A jagged crack spread across the mortar. When Shadow pushed harder, a fragment gave way, falling to the floor with a hollow clink. A gap yawned open. Cold air spilled out, carrying the stench of damp earth and iron. Then came the sound, a voice, weak, strained. Help! Daniel froze, every muscle taut. He crouched closer, shining his light into the narrow opening. "Hello, can you hear me?" A sob answered, then words, broken, urgent. "Please, don't let him." The voice cut off, swallowed by the dark. Shadow barked furiously into the hole, hackles bristling. His body pressed tight to Daniel's leg. Torn between fear and loyalty, Daniel gripped his radio. Static fizzled. No signal, no backup, no way out except forward. He looked back at the doll, the not quite doll, its chest still rising in shallow, painful rhythm. A warning, a message. The hole was barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was alive down there. Every instinct screamed to wait, to hold position, to follow procedure. But procedures had never saved the missing children of Hollow Creek. They hadn't explained the blinking mannequin, and they sure as hell didn't explain a doll that breathed. Daniel set his flashlight between his teeth, braced his hands against the bricks, and shoved. Mortar crumbled, dust filled the air, gritty in his throat. The gap widened. Shadow pressed forward first, growling nose working furiously. Daniel followed, forcing his shoulders through the opening. The darkness swallowed them whole, and then Daniel heard it clear this time. Undeniable, breathing, not just one, not two, dozens. Shallow, uneven, human. The sound crawled up from the depths, echoing off unseen walls. Daniel's skin went cold. Shadow barked again, the sound ricocheting down the hidden corridor. The whispers and cries weren't just in his head anymore. They were real, alive, waiting. The hole in the wall yawned like a throat, swallowing the light. Dust floated in the air, clinging to Daniel's skin, coating his lungs with every breath. He hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to wait, to turn back, but then Shadow growled. The dog's eyes locked on the black gap, his body rigid, without waiting for command. He squeezed into the opening, claws scraping against the crumbling brick. Daniel cursed under his breath. Shadow, damn it. He followed, pushing himself through the narrow passage. The brick scraped his shoulders, tearing his jacket, until suddenly the wall gave way to a steep descent. The air was colder here, damp and heavy. Each breath carried the stench of rot, rust, and something else, something sweet, cloying, unnatural. His flashlight beam wavered as he climbed down. The sound of his own breathing echoed too loud. And then another breath answered, not his, not Shadow's. Daniel froze, sweeping the light across the tunnel. The beam caught on something pale in the dark, a face, small, round, eyes wide, but it wasn't alive. It was porcelain, a doll's head, cracked and dirty, embedded into the wall like it had grown there. Dozens of others lined the tunnel, teeny faces staring blankly, mouths open as if caught mid-scream. Shadow growled again, teeth bared. He moved forward, forcing Daniel to follow. The tunnel widened into a cramped chamber. The ceiling sagged low, pipes dripping water into puddles that rippled under the flashlight's glare. And in the center of the room sat a child, a little girl, no older than 9. Her skin was pale, her hair tangled, her dress torn. She sat curled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. Her wide eyes flicked up at the light. Around her, arranged in a circle, were dolls, not broken, not cracked, perfect, identical. Each one was her. Daniel's breath caught. There were at least a dozen, maybe more, porcelain replicas of the girl, dressed the same, hairstyled the same, faces painted with eerie precision. They stared at her in silence, their glass eyes glinting in the light. The girl shivered, pressing back against the wall as if trying to disappear. Her lips moved, and a whisper escaped. "Don't let him put me in the box again." The words were weak, fragile, but they cut through Daniel like a blade. He crouched, lowering his flashlight. "It's okay. You're safe now. What's your name?" Her voice cracked. "Abby." Shadow crept forward, his body low, tail stiff. He sniffed the ground, circling the girl, then positioned himself between her and the surrounding dolls as if to shield her. Daniel reached out a hand slowly. Abby didn't move, didn't trust, but she didn't pull away either. Then the room changed. The light, the faint bulb strung along the ceiling, flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed them whole. At the same time, a heavy metallic clunk echoed through the tunnel, the sound of a door slamming shut. Daniel jerked around, sweeping his flashlight toward the passage they'd come through. A steel barrier had dropped into place, sealing the way out. He ran to it, pounding his fist against the cold surface. It didn't budge. His radio hissed static, then cut dead. Shadow barked furiously, hackles raised, eyes darting into the darkness. Abby whimpered, burying her face in her knees. Daniel's light trembled in his hand as he scanned the chamber again. The dolls surrounding Abby were closer now. He was sure of it. They hadn't moved, but their positions had changed. Their heads tilted, their painted lips curved just slightly, too much like real smiles. Daniel's skin crawled. The darkness pressed closer, heavier, alive. He tightened his grip on his weapon, keeping the flashlight trained on the far corners of the chamber. The factory wasn't abandoned. It was a trap, and now they were inside it. The chamber was silent, except for Abby's shallow breathing and the steady drip of water from the pipes. Daniel kept his flashlight moving, sweeping across the walls. And then he saw it. The chamber wasn't just a room. It was a gallery. Figures lined the walls, some seated, some standing, some frozen mid-motion. At first glance, they looked human. A man in a suit, a woman clutching a handbag, a boy with a baseball cap. Their eyes stared forward, blank and glassy, their skin smooth and pale. Not alive, wax, or something that only looked like wax. Daniel's stomach twisted. These weren't random figures. They were portraits, replicas of people, victims. He stepped closer to one of the statues, shining the beam on its face. The detail was disturbing. Every wrinkle, every hair, every imperfection etched into that expressionless surface. It wasn't art. It was a theft of identity. Shadow barked suddenly, breaking the silence. His hackles were up, his body rigid, growl rumbling low in his chest. He refused to move deeper into the gallery, claws scraping against the damp floor as he dug in. Abby whimpered, clutching Daniel's sleeve. Daniel raised a hand. "Easy, stay close." He pushed forward, flashlight trembling as it lit more figures. The circle of wax people grew, each one staring, each one to reel. He thought he saw one breathe. Then a sound broke the silence. A voice.com, male, drawn out, every word deliberate. The dolls must be perfect. Daniel spun, flashlight beam cutting through the chamber. Nothing, only walls and frozen faces. The voice came again. "Closer now. You can't rush perfection. Every detail matters, every hair in place, every smile just right." Abby pressed her face into Daniel's arm. Shadow barked again, snapping his jaws at the dark. Daniel raised his weapon. "Show yourself." Something moved at the edge of the light. A shadow among shadows, tall, thin, shoulders hunched. He lingered at the far end of the room, just beyond the reach of the beam. Daniel adjusted the light, and for a split second the figure was visible, a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was stretched thin, almost waxy. His clothes were stained with streaks of clay, paint, something darker. His hands glistened as if dipped in wet plaster. But it was his mask that froze Daniel's breath. A porcelain face, smooth and blank, covering his own, 2 holes for eyes. A faint crack running from the corner of the mouth to the jaw. The doll maker. He tilted his head, studying Daniel the way an artist might study a subject. Slowly, he lifted one gloved hand. Between his fingers was a scalpel, the blade catching the faint glow of Daniel's flashlight. Shadow lunged forward, teeth bare, growl tearing through the silence, but the doll maker didn't flinch. He simply lowered the scalpel and tapped it once against his mask. Clink, the sound echoed too long, bouncing around the chamber like a bell tolling. Abby whispered, "He makes them stay, he makes them quiet forever." Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. He raised his weapon, but his finger froze on the trigger. The air around him felt heavy, suffocating, as though the room itself resisted violence. The doll-maker spoke again, voice soft, almost tender. "You brought me a broken one." His gaze shifted past Daniel to Abby. Daniel stepped in front of her. "You're not touching her." The doll-maker chuckled, a hollow, brittle sound. "They always say that. Parents, strangers, protectors, but they all break, eventually. And then they become perfect." The figures along the walls seemed to lean closer, their glassy eyes catching the trembling flashlight beam. Daniel tightened his grip on the gun. "You're not taking her." The doll-maker tilted his head again, like a curious child. Then he whispered, "Not yet." And in that instant, the lights overhead flared to life. The chamber was bathed in a sickly yellow glow, revealing the full scope of the horror. Dozens of wax figures lined the room. Men, women, children, each one frozen, lifelike, soulless. Daniel's chest tightened. This wasn't a gallery, it was a graveyard. The chamber's yellow light flickered, casting long shadows across the wax figures. Every glassy eye seemed fixed on Daniel, Abby, and Shadow, and then he stepped forward. The doll-maker emerged from the far end of the room. He no longer lingered in the darkness. He wanted to be seen. His body was frail, his frame almost skeletal beneath tattered work clothes streaked with clay, wax, and blood. Each movement was stiff, jerky, as if his bones resisted carrying him. His porcelain mask caught the light. Cracked smile frozen in place, but through the eye, Daniel could see them 2 eyes, bloodshot and wild, darting, twitching with obsession. In his right hand, he clutched a knife. Not a kitchen knife, not a weapon of war, but a craftsman's tool, thin, sharp, made for carving. The blade gleamed like silver fire under the flickering light. The doll-maker's voice broke the silence. "Do you see them? My gallery, my children, they will never grow old, never decay. Perfect forever." He ran the blade lovingly along the cheek of one nearby figure, the sound of steel on wax scraping through the chamber. Abby whimpered and hid her face in Daniel's side. Daniel steadied his voice. "You're sick. These aren't children. They're victims." The doll-maker tilted his head, porcelain masks clicking softly with a movement. "Victims? No, they were broken, fragile, temporary. I saved them. I made them beautiful." Shadow barked, his body low, ready to spring. His growl filled the room, vibrating in the air. The doll-maker raised a finger, pointing directly at Daniel. "And now you've brought me another. The girl. She'll be the masterpiece." Daniel stepped in front of Abby, weapon raised. "You're not laying a hand on her." The doll-maker chuckled, soft at first, then louder, high-pitched, manic, echoing off the chamber walls. "You all say that, fathers, brothers, protectors, but the clay cracks, the wood splinters, the flesh rots. Only I can make her perfect." Then he lunged. It happened fast, too fast. One moment he was across the room. The next he was closing the distance with frightening speed. His knife slashed through the air, catching the edge of Daniel's jacket. Shadow exploded forward. He hit the doll-maker full force, teeth sinking into the man's arm. The knife clattered to the ground, skidding across the floor. The doll-maker shrieked, not in pain but in rage, his voice shrill and distorted under the porcelain mask. "No, you will not ruin her." He slammed his free hand into Shadow's side, clawing, striking, trying to rip the dog away. Shadow growled, refusing to let go, dragging the doll-maker down to one knee. Daniel seized the moment. He kicked the knife further away and leveled his gun. "Stay down." But the doll-maker didn't stop. With terrifying strength, he bashed his masked face against Shadow's skull. The crack echoed like shattering porcelain. Shadow yelped but didn't release. Daniel fired a warning shot into the ground. The sound was deafening in the confined space. Abby screamed, covering her ears. The doll-maker froze, his chest heaving. He turned his head toward Daniel, mask cracked, revealing part of his real face beneath. Skin pale, jaw sunken, lips stretched thin, trembling with manic fury. "You don't understand," he whispered. "This is bigger than me, bigger than her. The dolls are waiting. They are hungry." Daniel shook his head, finger tight on the trigger. "You're finished." The dollmaker's laughter came again, softer this time, almost childlike. "No, I'm only beginning." With sudden violence, he twisted his arm free from Shadow's jaws, kicking the dog aside. Shadow hit the floor with a thud but scrambled back up, snarling, ready for another strike. Daniel fired again, this time grazing the dollmaker's shoulder. Bits of porcelain mask splintered, falling to the floor like broken teeth. The man screamed, high and piercing, more animal than human. He grabbed the scalpel from the ground with his other hand, spinning it in his fingers like a painter with a brush. He lunged once more. Daniel shoved Abby behind him, blocking the blade with his forearm. The edge sliced shallow across his skin, burning with pain. But he forced the dollmaker back with the butt of his gun. Shadow leapt again, jaws snapping, aiming for the throat. The chamber erupted into chaos, barking, steel clashing against stone. The wax figures loomed all around, silent witnesses to the struggle, and above the noise, the dollmaker's voice never stopped. "Perfection, perfection, she will be mine." Daniel gritted his teeth, blood dripping down his arm, heart hammering. He knew this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for Abby's soul. The dollmaker's scream echoed through the chamber, sharp enough to rattle glass. His cracked porcelain mask slid further down his face, revealing more of the gaunt, ruined man beneath. He swung the scalpel wildly, desperate, furious. Daniel blocked with his arm, grimacing at the sting of another shallow cut. Shadow lunged again, snarling, keeping the monster from closing in on Abby. Then it happened. A deep groan shook the ground beneath their feet. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere in the walls, stone cracked with a jagged snap. Daniel's eyes darted upward. The entire factory was trembling. Another crack split through the chamber. A slab of concrete sheared away from the ceiling and smashed into the floor, shattering a row of wax figures. Their painted faces crumbled into dust, their glass eyes scattering across the ground like marbles. Abby screamed. Shadow barked furiously. The dollmaker only laughed. "She's mine. Even if the walls fall, she will be mine forever." The floor pitched violently, nearly throwing Daniel off his feet. He grabbed Abby with one arm, pulling her close, shielding her from falling debris. "Shadow, this way," Daniel shouted, his voice nearly drowned by the roar of collapsing stone. The dog obeyed, darting toward the gap they had entered through. His bark cut through the noise, guiding Daniel forward. But the dollmaker wasn't finished. He lurched through the chaos, his knife flashing in the failing light. He swung at Daniel, missing by inches as another tremor knocked him off balance. The ground split, a jagged line tearing across the chamber floor. The dollmaker stumbled, arms flailing, catching himself against one of his wax creations. The figure toppled, dragging him down with it. For a moment, Daniel almost felt pity. The old man's hands clawed at the broken dolls, clutching them as if they were truly alive. His cracked mask tilted toward Daniel, eyes blazing with obsession. "Don't take her," he shrieked. "Don't you dare steal perfection from me." But then another beam fell from above, crashing between them. The dust exploded upward, swallowing the dollmaker from sight. Daniel didn't wait to see if he'd survived. He pulled Abby tighter into his arms and pushed toward Shadow's voice. The corridor outside was collapsing too. Bricks rained from the walls. Shards of broken glass showered down from the high windows. The factory groaned like a dying animal. Every sound louder, closer, final. "Hold on, Abby," Daniel muttered, his breath ragged. "Just hold on." Shadow raced ahead, weaving through the falling debris. His barks echoed, guiding Daniel like a beacon. Daniel stumbled after him, dodging a collapsing beam that slammed into the ground just inches behind. The heat of friction and dust filled the air, choking every breath. Another section of the ceiling gave way. Daniel dropped low, clutching Abby, shielding her as rubble crashed around them. His ears rang with the deafening noise, but he forced himself up again. There was no stopping now. Finally, a faint glow appeared ahead. The exit. Shadow burst through first, disappearing into the night. Daniel followed, lungs burning, legs screaming with exhaustion. He leaped over a pile of rubble as the final collapse roared behind him, and then air-cold, fresh night air hit his face. He staggered out into the open field just as the factory gave its last cry. With a thunderous crash, the old doll factory of Hollow Creek caved in on itself. Dust and sparks shot into the night sky, a cloud of smoke billowing upward like the breath of something finally slain. Daniel collapsed to his knees, clutching Abby to his chest. She clung to him, trembling, her face buried against his shoulder. Shadow circled them, barking tail low, body tense. Behind them, the factory was gone, reduced to rubble. Silence settled. Only the distant sirens of approaching units cut through the night. Daniel's eyes stayed on the wreckage, scanning every shadow, every plume of dust. He wanted to believe it was over, that the doll maker had been buried with his twisted creations. But in the pit of his stomach, he knew better. Men like that didn't vanish so easily. He looked down at Abby. Her small hand clutched his torn sleeve, knuckles white. She whispered something barely audible. "Don't let him put me in the box." Daniel hugged her tighter. His eyes locked on the ruins. Shadow gave a single, low growl, his gaze fixed on the rubble as if expecting movement. The doll maker's body was nowhere to be seen, and in the silence between sirens, Daniel swore he could still hear it, faint, almost swallowed by the earth. A laugh, high, broken, still alive, waiting. The sirens came first, their wails slicing through the night as red and blue lights washed over the ruins of the Hollow Creek doll factory. Smoke still curled upward from the collapsed roof, twisting into the sky like the last breath of something that should never have existed. Daniel stood just beyond the rubble, his chest heaving. Dust clung to his face, sweat stung his eyes, and his arms ached from carrying Abby. The little girl was wrapped in his jacket. Trembling but alive, Shadow pressed close against them, his fur streaked with ash, hackles still raised. He hadn't stopped growling since they made it out. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe it was over. The building was gone. The nightmare was buried. Then Abby stirred in his arms. Her voice was faint, rasping, but the words froze him in place. "He still has them." Daniel crouched lower, brushing dirt from her hair. "Who, Abby? Who does he still have?" Her eyes flicked toward the wreckage, pale, wide, almost glazed with terror. "The other kids, in the boxes. He told me they'll stay perfect forever. Don't let him put me in a box." Her small hands clutched at his shirt with desperate strength. Daniel's throat tightened. He glanced back at the ruins. His instinct screamed that she was right, that somewhere under that broken mass of brick and steel, the doll maker's work was not finished. A paramedic rushed over, kneeling. "We'll take her from here, sir." But Abby shook her head violently. "No, don't let them put me in a box." Daniel tightened his grip around her shoulders, forcing calm into his voice. "No boxes, Abby. I'll be right here. You're safe." She searched his eyes, and slowly, reluctantly, allowed herself to be eased onto the stretcher. Shadow leaped up immediately, planting himself at her feet, refusing to move even when the paramedics tried to coax him down. Daniel didn't argue. Shadow wasn't leaving her side. Still, Daniel couldn't relax. His gaze kept drifting back to the blackened pile of rubble. Floodlights swept over jagged walls, broken beams, and twisted rebar, but nothing moved. No sound except the hum of engines and the distant crackle of radios. Too quiet, too still. Daniel took a step toward the ruins. "Agent Hale, stay clear," an officer warned. "That structure isn't stable." He ignored him. His hand hovered near his holster as he scanned the darkness. His heart thudded with the same rhythm he'd heard behind that bricked wall. Knock, knock, knock. Shadow barked suddenly from inside the ambulance. The sound was sharp, violent, like a blade tearing through the quiet. Every head turned. Daniel froze. He knew that bark. It wasn't random. It wasn't nervous. It was a warning. He followed Shadow's gaze to the far corner of the rubble. It was the one place the floodlights didn't reach, a pocket of darkness untouched by the glow. Daniel squinted. For a fraction of a second, he swore he saw movement, a figure shifting, too tall, too thin, watching. Then it was gone. Abby's scream pierced the night. She sat up on the stretcher, pointing with a shaking hand. "He's there. He's still there." The paramedics tried to calm her, but Daniel believed her. He felt it too. He stepped forward, voice steady though his insides twisted. "Griggs, if you can hear me, if you survived this, I'll find you. You're not taking her. You're not taking anyone." The ruins answered with silence. But it wasn't empty silence. It was listening, waiting. Daniel forced himself to turn back. He climbed into the ambulance. Placing a hand on Abby's shoulder, Shadow immediately relaxed against her legs. Though his eyes never left the factory, the doors slammed shut, the siren wailed, and the vehicle lurched forward. Daniel sat with his back to the wall, watching through the rear window as the Hollow Creek doll factory shrank into the distance. But just before the wreckage vanished from sight, something happened. One of the broken walls shifted, only slightly. A few bricks tumbled free, falling into the dust, and in the gap left behind, a faint glow flickered like candlelight, like eyes. Then came the sound, a laugh, high, rasping, unmistakable. It carried across the night, cutting through the siren's wail, reaching straight into Daniel's chest. Abby covered her ears. Shadow snarled, teeth bared. Daniel's stomach sank. The dollmaker wasn't gone. The factory was destroyed, but the evil inside it still breathed. And Daniel knew this wasn't the end. Not for Abby, not for the missing children, not for him. It was only the beginning.